Perfect. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode of the Shock and Awe podcast. I am your host, Mr. Robbie Hollywood, and I am very, very glad because today I am joined by the very illustrious Kari Holland. Kari is a fellow Torontonian, a film producer, and an all around gentle lady. I don't even know if that's a term. Do people use that as a term? Gentle
Gentle.
lady.
I
Is
mean,
that a
they
thing?
might. I'm not sure it would be used to
Hey, you
describe
know what?
me, but I'll take it.
Every word has a beginning, right? So it's only fair, I guess. Maybe if that ends up becoming part of the lexicon, then we know exactly where the what the source was, right?
You're the sort. You heard it here first.
Here
Yeah,
to hear first. Awesome, Carrie. First of all, thank you so much for doing this.
it's my pleasure.
Just kind of like a little bit of background how the conversation started. So it was, so just to give you guys a little background. For those of you who follow me on Instagram, you might have noticed that there was an addition to my Instagram handle. So there, just to give you a little bit of background as well to Carrie. So the way it happened is, it was a friend of mine where, I think, we talked politics a lot, and we had some kind of wager. This was like 2 months. It was like, okay, if you lose, you're gonna have to put the word Ayatollah into your name on Instagram for 6 months. I'm like, you know what? We had a couple drinks, but I'm a man who lives by my wagers. And Carrie had out of I've had that on I think for like maybe two months or so. And Carrie addressed it. She pointed out, I was like, hey, listen, why do you have that name in your handle? Because especially with the political climate that we're in right now, it might come off as hurtful. And of course, my initial reaction was a little bit defensive, but I'm like, look, this is Carrie, right? I know for sure it's not coming from a place of animosity, so let me actually kind of hear her out. We had a little exchange in the DMs. We actually decided, you know what, like, why don't we have this conversation out in the open, because I feel like that's something that is needed, right?
Yeah, and actually, it's like the perfect example of so many things, which is a bit of information, everyone's favorite word, a little bit out of context or not knowing everything, around
Hmm.
it, which we got through. And then
Hmm.
also just different perspectives and in a conversation, because
Right,
the conversation ended up being productive.
right,
You
right.
you were able to hear me, which I appreciated, and listen to where I was coming from when I
Hmm.
keep seeing Ayatollah up in my in my
Yeah,
stories. I'm sort of like, as
right,
a Jewish person living in the world
right.
right now, I'm sort of like,
Mhm.
you know
So that's that
not
kind
down
of
with the Ayatollah.
yeah, right. So that kind of like brings me, I guess, to to like the first point. Just kind of really like kind of break down for me how, because I could look from a broader standpoint. Yes, with the idea of the Iranian regime. And as somebody who follows politics, like it wasn't hard for me to be able to understand those connections, right? Like, I'm a firm believer that we ended up where we are today because Iran didn't want to lose its influence in the Middle East. Like, there was the kind of like the looming Abraham Accords that was bringing Israel into the fold with a lot of Iran's neighbors. And for them, it meant that they were going to lose a lot of their sphere of influence in the region, right? But I kind of want to like pinpoint kind of like the human aspect of it, or how that kind of what kind of feelings were. Because I mean, look, you and I have been friends on Instagram for a long time, right? Like, I'm sure you've seen some names, but why that particular one? Why did it evoke those kind of emotions in you? Maybe if you want to kind of like break that down a little bit
Yeah, I mean, and
outside of like the.
totally. And a few things too, like getting back to like the human side of it, that's exactly what it is. Like, let's start with how
Hmm.
we met. It's like
Hmm.
we met through a mutual friend, Adrian, working on
Hmm.
a project, and then you
Hmm.
shared a project with me.
Hmm.
And I'm circling back to the human side because this
Right.
kind of taps into. Are you comfortable with me sharing that?
Absolutely,
Okay,
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
I didn't know where it
I'm an
started to
open
stop.
book.
So you shared a pilot with me, which I absolutely loved.
Hmm.
And that's where I learned a bit of your background, right? And
Hmm.
I don't think this ever came up, but I wondered if I'm asking you now because I'm not sure if I ever asked you in the moment. You shared with me your story. You were, born in Rwanda, and
Correct. Yeah.
what you firsthand experienced living through a war. and the story that you were telling, and I never sort of asked you
Mhm.
what did you think? Why do you think I connected with that story, or in general, like why I would have felt sort of passionate or inclined to even
Mhm.
want to share in telling that story, or just connect to it, period. Like,
Well,
I'm
I
actually
mean,
just curious to know
yeah, yeah.
because
I mean,
I
first of
think
all,
we'll
I
get,
mean, it's
yeah.
it's a fantastic script. It goes without
Yeah.
saying,
Says
right?
everyone who's written the
Um,
script.
but yeah, no, I feel definitely like there is that connection, between people of Jewish descent and Rwandans because
Did you
you know,
even know I was Jewish? Like, I don't even know. Like, now when I look back, I
right.
realize there's all these assumptions or things that I think and don't even like. Did you even know I was
Mm.
Jewish? Did that was that dot connected back then?
Well, not back then. No, not back then. Right. Especially like
Okay.
last name Holland. I was like, oh, she must be Dutch. This is great.
Oh,
It's,
wrong.
you know what
By
I
the
mean?
way,
It's
my
just like,
last name isn't really Holland.
oh,
My grandfather changed it when he came over from Poland.
okay.
So
Oh,
that's,
so okay.
a lot of Jewish people, our last names aren't our last name. It was changed. My real last name, it's not my real last name. Holland is my
Mhm.
last name, but
Right.
the last name of my family was Olja, which was Olzka, which, they were from Poland and
Right.
migrated pre-war to.
Is it because like the name, like I guess like a Jewish last name had a certain
Yeah, we
connotation
were
to
in
old black?
hiding. We didn't want to have.
Yeah.
They literally were leaving and hiding from,
Mhm.
having to escape anti-Semitism, and
Mhm.
most people change. Many Jewish people changed their names.
I always find that fascinating because like you look because I've heard like I think who else I think it was like John Stewart. There was somebody else who's famous who had like a Jewish last name,
Mm.
and they changed to kind of fit it. But then you also have the Whoopi Goldbergs of this world. So
Yeah,
I'm like, what,
some do, some not everyone.
right,
Not everyone did, and I
right?
don't
No,
actually
but
know enough.
Whoopi took on the Goldberg last name. Right, like because when you think like, okay, John Stewart changed his name because he thought it wouldn't help him in Hollywood, but Whoopi Goldberg took on you see, I'm just kind of like,
I do.
where do we draw the line? Is it a right? Is it a like a is it question of downfall and that kind of thing, right? But
Well, it
yeah, like you were
actually kind
saying,
of summarizes the Jewish experiences, which
right?
is for John Stewart, it was like, okay, they're probably going to maybe hate me or look at me
Mm,
differently. And
mm-hmm.
for Whippy, it was probably like, Jews fucking run Hollywood. I'm going to full Goldberg,
I'm gonna
right?
put
Like
that on my,
it
yeah.
kind of sums it up,
Yeah, until they open that package with the headshots and it's like, she
Yeah.
must be Ethiopian. She must be
I was gonna say, but
Ethiopian.
that's another, I mean, part of what we'll talk about too is like these
Right.
tropes or ideas, like, because we
Hmm.
sort of touched on this. We'll go back to the script, right? So
Right.
you
Right.
shared the script with me, and
Hmm.
like many stories of different people that I get, I read scripts all the time. I get pitches all the time. I've
Hmm.
always connected to the human experience or connecting to someone's personal trauma or story
Hmm.
of overcoming, persecution,
Hmm.
anything. And the
Hmm.
reason why I connect to all these stories or have always felt a passion for telling or aligning with voices that have these stories to tell is
Hmm.
because I'm Jewish.
Right.
It's like, I'm not even sure I ever said that out loud
Hmm.
until this moment. Like, there's a sea, I've never seen before in this way. You're a black man, you experience
Hmm.
racism, you understand it. I've
Hmm.
never seen a bubbling up of a hatred. I knew it existed because it's what we've been taught and raised on, but
Hmm.
quite in this way where it's so permitted right now, so open, and then not just like what I'm having a hard time with is and I've had many conversations with many of my friends who are black, who are Muslim, who are different things, where that
Hmm.
line is between, and I understand some of the confusion between a disdain for the Israeli government, its actions, the conflict,
Hmm.
and then a
Hmm.
pure blind Jewish hatred. I'm not even going to call it anti-Semitism, but
Hmm.
Jewish hatred and Jewish racism, and the inability to stand up for it. Because when we watched what happened with George Floyd, it was so visceral,
Hmm.
watching a grown man scream for his mother while he's being suffocated by the police. You
Hmm.
couldn't help but feel that pain. And what
Hmm.
it triggered was a necessary response to systemic
Hmm.
police brutality and racism. There's something happening right now, even with like two things can exist at once. Let's
Hmm.
talk about the college campuses. I'm all for protests. I literally slid into your DMs to protest your fucking scandal. I'm okay to
And
take
good on you. I'm a free
action.
speech absolutist, and that
I'm
was your
totally
right,
for
and you exercised it.
speech. Yeah, you know, and for drastic measures, or, you know, doing something to show and stand up for what you believe in. And at the same time, when that's tied to hate speech, violence, or discrimination, it's not okay. And every time you say something about the protesters, what I can't understand is why more people at these protests aren't condemning the ones that are getting violent, screaming things like, you know, Hitler should have finished the job. I've seen more swastikas in the like ether than American History X, like watching that movie. You know, like this is I don't even understand. And if you're just against Israel, why are you holding up swastikas? Why
I
are you
think
saying death to the Jews? And then also the lack of understanding, like I'm gonna say it right now, I'm a Zionist. So many people will hear that and just shudder, and they're gonna have this assumption. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm a Jewish woman. I was raised Jewish, and as a Zionist, all that means at its core is the belief that Israel has a right to exist, just period, not without. There's not an exception. And that Jews have a right to self-determination and have a place to go. To me, that doesn't mean without Palestinians or without a two-state solution. And again, I don't have the answers of how to make these things happen, but that word's been turned into such a dirty word, you know. And then it's like, well, I don't hate Jews, I just hate Zionists. And it's like, well, I'm not against Jews, but there's so much permission for a discrimination and hate speech, you know. Like, again, it feels like, okay, well, I can even understand you don't know what from the river to the sea means. It's like, well, technically, when that chant is happening, and now you hear it because it's a lot more open, where it's like, we don't want no two states, we want it all, you know. And that's what from the river to the sea means. It means wiping out Jews, and that it's a Palestinian state, you know. And I believe on both sides, there's people who just want to coexist, live in peace, and have the same. Very early on in the conflict, I always actually challenged the Jewish community that I grew up with more than I think a lot of people. Like, I was kind of always an outlier. I branched out. I went away and traveled young. I embedded myself in an industry that introduced me to so many different people and cultures and backgrounds. I had a different experience, which was a different connection to everything that happened in my life. And I remember early on, I actually had posted, it was like mid-October, and I shared something from a Palestinian journalist, and I got a lot of flack for it. You know, like, some of my friends that are Jewish are like, why are you sharing that? And I said, because I think it's important to see what's happening and understand exactly what you're talking about, what's happening on both sides. And I think what's getting left out of the conversation for a lot of people who believe a lot of these tropes or lies that Jews are the, you know, the source of all evil, all oppressors and apartheid and all these words, genocide, you know, we're occupiers. It's like, if you look at just the basic math, we are 15 million people on the planet, and there's 8 billion. How the fuck could we ever have that much power? I don't care if you, I don't care if 20% of the billionaires in the world are Jewish. Like, just mathematically, our collective
it's a small number of people.
Would be impossible to control as much as people believe us to have, you know.
No, definitely. You made a few points there that I kind of wanted to touch on. So the first one obviously was, you know, social media. So the algorithm is kind of a double-edged sword in a way, because all it did is just give people confirmation bias, right? So if the algorithm knows you believe a certain things, it's only going to feed you opinions that match whatever your set of beliefs are. If you're someone who is extreme on one side, you're going to get extreme content of that side. If you're extreme on the right side, you're going to get extreme. And if you're in the middle, you're going to kind of get that mix. So that's one thing. Two, now there's no filter to what people can see, right? You know, like I always hear like this, you know, this example from kind of like Israeli spokespeople talking about how, like, you know, but look what the American, the Allies did in Dresden, trying to talk about like the kind of like the airstrikes, right? But look what they did in Dresden. But again, you got to remember too, all you could find out about what was going on in Dresden is your Sunday paper that you got once every 7 days, and those are just worth. Now it's just there is these very graphic images where everybody feels like they're on the ground. So the spirits are so much more cooked at that point, and then you get fed that over and over and over and over again. So it drives everybody to the extreme.
Oh yeah,
right?
people are reacting to very raw and visceral emotion, and from what they're seeing. I think the part that scares me is how much people aren't seeing.
Yeah, but that's also that's also what's going to bring me to my next point, because you also made that kind of that you kind of stated a notion where you like, hey, listen, you can disagree with the Israeli state and what they're doing, but also not be hateful towards Jews. And this is obviously seen in the fact that a lot of these kids on these college campuses, quite a considerable number of them also are of Jewish descent. I think what happened here is what mainstream media did, because this whole that's
also literally the definition of tokenism, right? Of course there's Jews that are, first of all, no one's people is a monolith, right?
Let me land that one point though, so like that, so because I really want to hear what you think. So what I feel like, because this whole entire movement was started as kind of like this divest movement, right? Where now I'm a firm believer in economical protesting, and I'll tell you why. I'll give you the background of why, right? An example that I use to why I believe that economical protest is really the only thing that works is I use the example of Black folks in North America, right? So the idea was, we're brought here, 400 years ago, and the story that we're told is that it took 400 years for a gentleman named Abraham Lincoln to be like, slavery must be bad. Maybe we should stop. But slavery, what people who are students of history will tell you, that slavery didn't end because, the people that were in power at that time had a kind of come to Jesus moment. Slavery ended because the South of the United States, which was much more agricultural, wanted to secede because they were tired of paying their taxes to the North. The North couldn't have that, especially because without those those materials that were coming from the South, they couldn't run their industry. So they decided to hit the South in the one place that hurt, which is the economics, right? And that's when these changes began to happen. If you fast forward to the 60s, for example, Black folks were marching. We were on bridges. We were.
Let's stop there for a minute too. Who was marching alongside you during that time?
The Jewish folks, absolutely, right?
Who was integral in the civil rights movement?
There's definitely a lot of Jewish brothers and sisters. But the point that I'm trying to make though is the marches is now what made the changes. Is when we started doing things like boycotting the bus. Because the guy who runs the bus company is the same guy who's actually financing your local Congress.
I understand what you're saying, and I understand the passion behind the divestment and these conflicts that you're talking about and why. It's a different beast when those conversations were pretty black and white. There was like a very clear distinction between right and wrong and slavery and the ties to the money, very linear, as you pointed out, And I want to make the civil rights movement not a footnote, because it all streams back to what we want to talk about, which is anti-Semitism and this allyship, which has been very lost. So coming back to that, I just want to say, it's like, I don't want to make that allyship and the 60s a footnote. I think it's important, and it's been lost in the conversation. The reason why that allyship was there was because of the shared identity and persecution,
Absolutely.
By identity, right? And when you talk about, why are there not the same calls to divest out of Qatar or out of Iran to fund Hamas? Like, my problem, the ask isn't the problem. Let's stop war. But
it's the hypocrisy of, hey, let's make
hypocrisy. Like, you want to follow the money everywhere you go. You're spending money that is some government is profiting. It's at the crux of it, the obsession with this specific conflict. You lived through an actual genocide. You lived through a war in Africa.
There's plenty of them still going on. Nobody's asking for divest from Apple. They're in the Congo, right? But I think so too, though. I think this.
Why doesn't it bother you that people are so obsessed with this when you were a child in Rwanda? Like, why the fuck were these voices not as passionate
As loud,
about
for
that?
sure. I think this particular conflict, though, it has, because there is a lot of things that kind of culminate together, right? First of all, there is the religious aspect of it. Like, that land there is literally every single religion in the world kind of culminates within that area, right? It's a conversation, Israel-Palestine has been, and this is not just something that just happened in the last 7 months. It was always kind of like that center, piece in the Middle East. So it has always been at the forefront of, if you're to rank like the top 10 conflicts that people care about in the world, Israel-Palestine is right at the top of the top.
Why do you think that is? Why?
So, like I said, there is a lot of things that kind of culminate in that. One of them being specifically that everybody who believes in some sort of deity, kind of really the majority of them kind of culminate towards that land. It's a whole land for the Muslims, the Jews, the Christians, etc. So that has a very particular connotation. Also, too, like as I mentioned as well.
Wait, I want to ask you something there.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's important to all those people, why is the ask for and the diminishing of one group's tie to it? And I think that also answers the question of why people are so obsessed with this conflict. It's not because it's just the Middle East and Israel-Palestine. It's because there's Jews involved. We have been the world's scapegoat for thousands of years. I'm going to ask you some questions that seem so dumb, but I have a point. Where do Africans come from?
Where do Africans come from?
Africa, right?
Africa, right? Yeah.
Where do Asian people come from?
Asia, yeah. Okay, right. I see what you said.
Where do Arab people come from?
The Middle East, kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Where do Jews come from?
And
Judea,
right?
Samaria, right? Like when people talk about, and I'm not here to dispute who gets what land. I'm not the fucking UN or Britain. I'm simply speaking to the question of our, indigenous ties to the land. We are an ethno-religion, which is very unique, right? I think there's a lot of things that people don't understand, and that's why I think it's important for dialogues. What does that mean? What does ethno-religious mean? It means we are both a nation and a religion wrapped up in one thing. So it's tied to our DNA. If you're a Christian, and I heard Rudy Israel telling this, he's an influencer. You should follow him. He's great. I mean, he's in the IDF, but he's a filmmaker too, and he makes a lot of really great points. And one of the points he made the other day on a podcast or on a video he made, if you're a Christian, if you're a Muslim, if you're almost any other religion and you sort of denounce it, you're like, I'm not doing that anymore. You are no longer that religion. If I'm a Jewish person and I decide I don't believe in this, I don't believe in Adonai, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in the religion, I'm still Jewish because it's actually my DNA. And I think a lot of people, what's been hurtful is like, go back to Europe, go back to Poland. The amount of people that don't know our history or how we were literally kicked out of every place in the Middle East, starting with Israel, and then Jews we were ethnically cleansed from Iran, Iraq, Morocco, Yemen, Syria. I grew up with Jewish friends that are Persian, that are Iraqi, that are Moroccan. Our roots are, even though over the years, came to Europe and then North America. And again, when I said that 15 million number, there's only 7 million Jews in the diaspora, and then the other 7 million are in Israel. We're so small. And when you trace our bloodlines back, our DNA, I mean, it's why half the Jews can't drink milk. We're basically inbred. It's like you can trace our DNA.
Can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a question about that? Do you feel like, I'm sure you're kind of familiar with, the Balfour Declaration and kind of how, Britain trying to, kind of win World War I, made all these alliances, making all kinds of people promises, right? They promised the land to, they go to the French, you guys are going to get Syria. They go to the Arabs, you guys are going to go to the Jews, etc. So do you feel like the fact that even at its core, yes, nobody denies that Jewish people are, that is their ancestral homeland. But do you feel like kind of like that, those political ties that kind of led to the Strait of Israel being started through, these kind of backroom
schoolyard sites, basically,
right? Like, yeah. Do you feel like that that may be because you remember you asked me the question is like, why is it that people care so much? Because you got to think about it, like like I was I've read like a few books about it, and it kind of all boils down to a lot of promises were made where a lot of people felt cheated, also per se. And that kind of created this monster that continued to fester over
1,000%. So if the answer is,
right?
do I think that had an effect on it? Absolutely. I don't think it's just what happened. I think it's how it happened. And I think that has played out for the past 75 years. I think it's a combination of, again, it's like, it's so complex, right?
Right.
You want both sides, people go back to 1948, talk about the Nakba. It's like, it's everyone's versus their own perspective and lived experience mixed with, generally speaking, war history. It's told through the victor's eyes, or however you want to see it, yeah, of course that plays a part of it. And there's blood on both sides. I mean, Netanyahu and Hamas have the same talking points. I'm not saying,
how insane is that?
It is.
Right? Yeah.
But I think what's the crux of like some of my grief is like, but I don't see people vilifying an entire nation's people name that government. I mean, you
think there's like a David against Goliath kind of syndrome as well that kind of comes at play, the
narrative's been flipped. And by the way, there's victims on both sides. There's pain and trauma on both sides. There's ties to the land on both sides. There's trauma on both sides. When you look at it at its core, there is a shared almost everything, but the way this is playing out now, there's also a lot of a bigger groundswell. It's so much bigger than I think everyone realized. And that's why it's like, not just the anti-Semitism, but when we talked about algorithms, there's a lot of people getting a lot of information that's just simply not true. And I understand that's on both sides. But this isn't a grassroots movement. What I'm shocked at is when I see people cheering on the protesters. I understand people's right to protest, but how are these same people who believe in freedom of speech and say that they want peace okay with a professor who's Jewish that goes to U of T being told by a bunch of students in keffiyehs that he can't go to his office? I don't understand the inability to hold two truths at the same time.
Right.
And at its core, if most people I want to believe are good people, they care about human rights and they care about justice, then why are you okay to give permission to that?
I feel like there is a bit of a doubling down on both sides, because I think what happened here, especially with these student protests, what I feel like what started as the idea of divestment, I feel like the political class and the mainstream media kind of took it as like, okay, any ill speak of the state of Israel is automatically anti-Semitic. So when you kind of place because when you kind of place those barriers, right? Yeah. So when you put those barriers there, people tend to. Because it just feels like people feel suffocated in a way, because you're like, okay, so how else?
But it's all intentional, right? Like it got muddy very quickly, quite intentionally. Like you want to talk about that's all intentional, because as you said, anyone with a prefrontal cortex, okay, I can understand the confusion. It's absolutely not anti-Semitic to speak ill of the Israeli government or to have an opinion.
But in the States, they just literally passed the law stating that Congress literally just passed it, that any criticism of the Israeli state is anti-Semitic, and there will be laws on the books to punish people for that. Do you see how
I do see how that's confusing, and I can't say that I fully agree with that sentiment, because I do think it's important to make the distinctions of where that anti-Semitism starts and stops. But again, I'm speaking to the people wearing Hamas headbands. If you guys are pro-Palestinian, you shouldn't be pro-Hamas, because they're not for the Palestinian people. Exactly. And I've seen so many young people talking about resistance and movements and all these justifications. It's like, on no planet in any conflict should
Gary,
rape be a weapon of war.
signs. They got signs that say "Queers for Palestine." It's
No,
like
no,
I
they're
saw that,
my
I was like, I'm
favorite.
out, I'm
They're
out,
my
I'm out.
favorite group.
Because I'm like,
Yeah.
you know, it's I compared it to like it's like saying a sign that says "chickens for KFC." Like that is
No, it
that
makes
is
no sense.
literally right. So no, but it goes to show you, like, right, that's
Or, but it's
see,
and it's also as you said, the emotion, like watching that girl at Columbia
right.
stand up and give a press conference. By the way, she
Mhm.
was Jewish, is
Mhm.
Jewish, saying that you're at an Ivy League school where they pay $70,000 a year to attend, and
Imagine.
that by not getting their meal plan in their encampment, they're being denied human aid, or what do you call it, humanitarian aid. It's like
Yeah.
they've
It's
really
buzzwords. It's
appropriated,
buzzwords. Yeah.
but they've appropriated. They're so desperate to feel and connect to something
Right.
that
Right.
they've lost touch with the reality. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
it's like
Oh yeah.
humanitarian aid at Columbia. Like,
Yeah, I mean, come
right?
on.
Like,
Come
I'm just
on,
thinking of
man.
the
Like,
actual
you
Palestinian
know?
people who are literally going through hell right now,
Right.
watching that, and I would be like,
It is no, it's asinine, right? But
it's
that's the thing with,
asinine.
yeah, is the thing with with any of these kinds of movement is like eventually the kind, you know, it's the same thing with BLM, right? What started as something that was, you know, good and decent and wanted to speak to the strife of black folks and police brutality, got taken by a bunch of people who now took that to, you know, embezzling money and all this type of thing. So a lot of these movements eventually kind of get bastardized in a way, right? But I think, again, just kind of going back to it, I think the best way to bring the temperature down on these things, because and tell me if I'm wrong, I feel like there is a you know, because these are not stupid kids, right? They, you know, if you manage to get into Colombia, you should be able to understand that Hamas.
There's a difference between intellect and the ability to get good grades. They're still kids. And by the way,
right.
I'm not just speaking about kids. I'm speaking about the adults that I see around me saying
Right.
things.
Right.
Like, I've had some pretty messed up conversations with people that I know, that I know well. And
but do you feel like throw, like, for example, that like, you know, like we're talking about, you know, the political class and you know, and the and mainstream media taking kind of that approach of any criticism of Israel is therefore anti-Semitic. Do you feel like that's in a way kind of drives up the heat on the other side, where people have to reach more and more desperate ways to kind of like they kind of go for the shock factor now, because conversation is no longer possible when people have different interpretations?
I think it's a bit of both. I
think
some people choose to ignore the distinctions and are just kind of don't care to make them. I think some people are too scared. I've had a lot of conversations with people who are like, I see what you're seeing. It's fucked up and I'm sorry. You know, it's like, why are my kids waking up in the middle of the night with nightmares that there's terrorists coming to get them? Like, why is there this fear? We live in Toronto. We're not living in Israel. We're not living in Gaza. We're not in Africa. We're in Toronto, Canada. You know, so the confusion around anti-Semitism, I understand how that term's now been misused on both sides, like the accusation and then the actual use of it. But there's enough that's blatant, and this targeting of, you know, burning Jewish businesses down, the language that's being used, the blocking Jewish students, like these things, that's not confusing. I've had this conversation with a lot of people. Like, you do know right from wrong. There's things that are confusing. There's stuff about this conflict and its history that's confusing. There's a blatant hatred that's happening in front of everyone's eyes. Like, the prime minister had to address it today. Like, anti-Semitism isn't that confusing. And I see how in the it's become sort of confusing, and Zionism and all these things. But there's a lot of blatant language and hatred, and then just actions that's not confusing. And that's where I get upset, where I'm like, why aren't you standing up for the things that you see happening? You know, there was an incident, it was filmed. I mean, today, every day you hear something. There was a Jewish Canadian man that was murdered in Egypt today. And it's like, it was, you know, I forget the name of the group that claimed it, but it's like, because he's Israeli. Granted, they're in the Middle East, so it's different. And, you know, in Greece, there was Israelis right now held up in a hotel with protesters trying to come in to basically kill them, and the police had to intervene. Like, this is no longer the tale that our grandparents lived through. And again, my grandmother's alive. She was not part of the Holocaust, but her family and friends, you know, she lived through World War II. this is happening also in Toronto, like they're ripping down flags. They're targeting Jewish students on campuses, targeting Jewish businesses, sharing, ideologies, and all the denial. Say what you will about how this conflict happened. The erasure of and the diminishing of what happened on October 7th is really like a cruel, unusual punishment. It's like there are still hostages and children, women. And when I say the documentation, I mean, people are like, well, what rape? What happened? Prove it. It's like, they were fucking body cams. Like, you and I work in film. It's not like you want to hide something.
Right?
Stick a GoPro on your chest when you're doing it,
Right.
And not only that, they had 24 delegations, like from 24 different countries of doctors come in and do these, when it comes to Israel, they're damned if they do, they're damned if you don't. You didn't show everything right away. It was like the prove it, don't prove it. Then they took their time, did the research, had, doctors from all over, not just Jewish, come and actually look at what happened. And the amount of sexual violence that happened on that day.
There's a really good documentary.
Nothing. Cheryl.
It's called
The Silent Screams.
Yes. I saw that. Wow, that it was. I mean, it's heart wrenching stuff. I think too, like, people, and I hate to use that word, kind of like the communications war, but I think also too, like, the fact that this is the first really major conflict that has played out on TikTok.
100%.
So like, so I feel like the people who are exposed to those images, right? And I'm sure you've seen them. Like, it is hard because there is way less. I feel like the footage of the October 7th massacres, they kind of came and went out of the news cycle so quickly.
It did.
And then everything else that we saw of this war was Gaza. So it's in a way you can kind of see why there is such this flame completely on the other side. Like, for example, I was asked why there is that 47-minute. No, I know it does not explain it. It does not justify it at all. I'm just trying to understand. You
make a good point, and part of I think every Jewish person right now is feeling is when I say how intentional the campaign around not just like the BDS but the Free Palestine movement is, that taps into the media. Look at what you said when we started our conversation on Instagram. They're like, well, Israel refused another ceasefire, and I was like,
we'll get to how Israel is running the war. Yeah. Well, I just kind of like want to make sure that we're
no, but this was about the propaganda machine. It was about the news. Basically, what my point is, down to the media, social media, there is a bias, and there's a reason why. You talk about divestment. There's a lot of money to be made right now on telling the story that's popular, or like tapping into that. This is so much of the propaganda and the narratives that are being told are completely inaccurate. And that's at every level. There's not a lot of truth, and that's on, again, all sides of it. But even, when you talk about the October 7th footage coming in and out, why? Like, if everyone's so okay to be
bombarded. Let me ask you a question. There's a 47-minute video.
Yes,
the idea of like that. So that was. I don't know if it's like it was only reserved for members of the media, or you had to request.
Yes.
Is that accessible to the general public or no?
It is now more.
Okay.
And the truth is, it's like only a fraction. I will find out for you. The reason why, again, it also ties to religion. Like, you do have to ask that you're watching a lot of these things play out. Some of the images you're seeing are real. Some of them are not. I've seen people sharing horrific images that are not from the current conflict, but calling it Gaza conflict. The October 7th footage, there was a real struggle. And like, to me, again, who am I to judge? I think Israel was protecting its citizens and its people out of respect for the victims and the families and the hostage. They withheld a lot of that footage because it was so graphic and so painful. They didn't want to share it widely. I do ask myself, and everyone has these conversations, what would have happened had they just released that footage on October 8th or October 9th? Because, by the way, that was a 47-minute cut down version of hours of footage that was collected. If people had seen that right away, I wonder if some of the reaction would have been different. We'll never know.
Yeah.
But the reason it wasn't being withheld for anything outside of partly religious and partly a protection. It was so horrific. And you do have to ask, one side is very okay to shove horrific images like wildly, and the other side was a little bit more reserved with it, and it backfired, that I do believe that 47-minute, the footage is out there on a bunch of different
Do you think the
now.
fact that Israel does not allow for journalists, other than other than certain drip drops here and there, just to go into Gaza, like like journalists have been in war
CNN
zones
went
all
in.
over, right?
They've had
Right,
people
but
go in
you know what I mean.
there.
Like it's like CNN, they'll go in on kind of like a guided tour, so people will look at it and be like, okay, you're showing us this kind of curated thing that you know what I mean, and they always have to kind of give that disclaimer. Do you think that it would have helped, right? Because again, like you always see, like every time, like let's say they're mentioning the death
I
toll,
don't know
right?
why that call was made either. I don't have the answer for that.
Because
But
also
I
too,
do
right?
think it might have made a difference. Although what I'm
Right.
seeing out of mainstream media, like even what we talked about, I'm amazed at how quickly the mainstream media will report something and then have to backtrack. And once it's out, it's out.
Right.
It's
Right.
really hard to get people to change their minds. Say, like with the bombing of Al Shifa Hospital, it wasn't Israel at first. That was the Hamas rockets hitting it. It's like so many times the media has said things that have been so damaging. Do I think it would have helped? Absolutely. Maybe, maybe not. Because depending on how these stories are told, even the very fact of absolutely too many lives have been lost. Period. Too many innocent lives have been lost. Too many journalists. And a lot of the lives lost that are journalists in Gaza have been absolutely a part of Hamas. There was a photo, and this was to me one of the most painful moments of watching things play out. The young girl, Shani Luke, who was taken hostage, murdered, raped. The image of her dead body, and you can see her legs are bent. There's blood between her legs. She's under. You can look this up. She's under 5 armed Hamas men in a truck. They're holding their guns up.
I think I've seen that with sweatpants or something.
No, not the girl with sweatpants. That's
okay.
Nava Levy, who's still in captivity. That photo was given the highest award in journalism. That was on October 7th. The journalist that took that photo,
AFP or something like that? I think I saw an article about something like that.
The Associated Press. What would the reaction be from you, any Black person, if in 2024 there was a picture of a group of KKK lynching and sitting on the dead body of a Black woman who had been raped by them? If that photo,
what was it? I think it was that picture of Emmett Till. There was a similar picture because I remember reading the article because it kind of compared. There was that picture of Emmett Till in his casket. Like at his burial, where you can see like his face mangled and all these type of things. But I see what you mean,
somebody
though.
In
like
a casket is different than somebody being literally while it's happening. The journalist wasn't there observing a conflict. He was observing an act of terrorism, rape by 5 men, and like there still are laws to journalism, right? When you're in an active conflict, that's one thing. This was on October 7th. As a Jewish woman and as a woman with a daughter, as any woman seeing that photo, I couldn't believe that not only was it being celebrated, the journalist who watched that fucking happen, took the photos of it, was given the highest prize in photojournalism by the Western media.
Look, from a human and personal standpoint, like you said, right? As you know, and I'm a parent myself, I can imagine the horror of something like that. But that, for example, it takes me back to images of they're right when the massacres began in Rwanda, and there was a lot of this footage of these, like people hiding in bushes and filming like these militias chopping up people with machetes and stuff like that, right? Yeah. So now that kind of brings me back to.
And were those photos taken by registered journalists, or were they?
Yeah, a lot of them. So they were Belgian television stations that were in the country because it was right around the time where the peace negotiations were happening and stuff like that, right? So at that point, if he was, that's another thing too, because if he was a willing participant and then film it? Like, let's say, for
He
example, if I
was. He was a
one of the
willing
guys in there.
participant.
No, but like, are we saying that like he was like one of the guys with the GoPros, or you see, like, I guess
The thing with Hamas, there's a fine line, right? Like, yes, he was a willing participant in this. This was not like an act of conflict. In that moment, he was watching, like, there's journalistic integrity, and then there's just human nature. You're watching somebody get brutal. Same with what you're talking about
yeah,
in
like, well, yeah.
Rwanda.
What is the difference
And
between being
he
a,
was,
you know, being a
there's
being
no
a
difference
journalist
in,
and a director of a snuff film, right? So that's kind of, yeah. There's definitely. I guess that kind of really segues us into like the next portion of our conversation. You know, the one of the aims of the Israeli government as you know, for this operation is the complete and total annihilation of Hamas, right? Now, there is this kind of notion in the lexicon that there is almost this mix of you know, if you're a Palestinian in Gaza, you're therefore a part of Hamas. So that kind of like brings me back to the UNRWA. No, but like, what do you think? Like, it's like, for example, when the whole UNRWA thing was going on with the, you know, where Israel brought up these accusations that there were members of UNRWA.
they've now been very verified and even, you know,
but they haven't, like, so just
UNRWA.
yeah, just to make sure that like, you know, you and I are on the same page. Like, when like the people that, because and this is where, like, you know, this is me kind of like playing devil's advocate, right? Because from what I understand is Israel used to vet every UNRWA had to submit the list of all their employees to the Israeli government. They will have to vet them, and they'll have final say on who gets to work for the organization or not, right? And also, too, at the same time, you know, in Gaza, where you have like a single party, if you can look it up, like on like every single every single UNRWA employee had to get checked. They had to go through an Israeli background check before they can be allowed to work for UNRWA. But also, too, when you think about it, like, you know, when in a place like Gaza, where it's like I think like
that's from the foreign aid workers, not the Palestinian UNRWA.
For the this is available information, Kari. You can look it up. Like they had to literally vet if you're gonna be working for UNRWA specifically. UNRWA had to submit the list of their employees, I think once a year or something like that. But I guess the point I'm trying to make, though, is, you know, when they say, for example, you know, these people are affiliated with Hamas, like the ones that participated in the October 7th massacres, absolutely, those guys should be dragged to the Hague if need be, right? But when they say, for example, like, you know, they were a member of Hamas, you know, in a place like Gaza, where you have a monoparty, where, you know, they run everything from the local government to everything, like, not being affiliated with Hamas is a pretty tough thing to do, right? Like, when you think about that, right?
Problem,
so I guess when I ask you that question is, let's say somebody who was, I don't know, he was a janitor in the Hamas office building, right? Had a Hamas card member. Let's say he's a card carrying member, but never kind of, you know, broke through Israel, did anything like that. Do those people also qualify for elimination? Because I feel like there is no lines that are drawn as like, what is the Hamas members that we're going after?
Lines drawn, stop. I would like to think that they're going after the active combatants. I mean, again, you have to ask the question too. Has it ever been this hard to distinguish between an army? Like, most armies dress in a certain type of uniform and clothing. Like, the thing with Hamas is they've made it almost impossible to make that distinction. I think, I don't know. I think Israel has a pretty good idea of who are the active. Look, at the end of the day, I also think it's not going to be as simple as like, let's go rid ourselves of all of Hamas. It's an ideology as well, you know? And I agree with you. I think there's a lot of blame pointed at innocent Palestinians. Like, I think both sides are being treated with this lumping of, you know, broad strokes and being painted with these big brushes. And I think that's it's equally bad on both sides. I think there are innocent Palestinians, and I think there are innocent Israelis, and I think there are bad governments on all sides of this. You know, and so, look, I'm not here to say I support the killing of any innocent civilians. I don't. I never. I all of it I find horrific. What started our conversation was out of a frustration amongst my own peers in my own community, of I feel very unseen and I feel very unsupported and I feel very targeted. And I find that hard because at the core of what we were trying to kind of talk about, we could talk about this conflict for days and we're never going to get anywhere because it's going to take, so it's a much bigger than an hour conversation, but what I really want to encourage people is to really try and break those algorithms. There's a great group, they're on Instagram too, and they have an amazing podcast called Unapologetic. And it's a group of Palestinians that are out of Israel, and they are, and they have Israelis on there. The voices that are coming from the region who do want peace, because if you're someone who believes in peace, I guess kind of like my plea is, then use that, your voice and the platform which you're jumping from, and stop with the fucking hate. It's like, stop the whataboutisms, stop the, justifications. It's like, if you want to be an activist and you believe in human rights and because I think we're saying the same thing. Is it okay for this innocent person to die because they're a janitor in a Hamas building? And is it okay for this person to die on the other side because they're Israeli and you have to be in the IDF? So is everyone considered a soldier? No, it's an army made up of civilians,
But I think just to cut, to narrow things down, I think the way that the conflict is prosecuted, and the kind of like the language in which it is parsed out to the world is very important, right? Because you hear a lot of, like, you made a really good point. You're like, how is the IDF supposed to make up who's a terrorist and who isn't when they don't have an army, right? But also too, on the other side, you got to ask yourself, like, you hear a lot of this is a term that has been coined by this conflict, is the term of human shields, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
but then
you
ask yourself, let me just actually, I was gonna ask you this. So, this idea of, like, Hamas is hiding behind human shields, therefore, these very intense airstrikes are justified because we don't know how to parse the difference. But then you ask yourself, like, okay, if Hamas was hiding in Tel Aviv, right, and was using, Jewish men, women, and children as human shields.
I mean, they're doing that right now with the hostages.
Right. But no, but like I'm saying, if they were in Tel Aviv, right, would the Israeli government use the same tactics? Like, would they bomb Tel Aviv into the Stone Age, killing thousands of Jews in the process?
I can answer it
just to get rid of Hamas, right?
It would never happen. You want to know why? The civilian population wouldn't be embedded. So if Hamas were in, like, just this,
it's a hostage situation, right? Like, just like,
they wouldn't bomb their own people at the expense of the hostages. Right? Hold on. But you're not asking something there's not an equivalent answer. It's not a scenario that could exist. The answer is, in Israel, there's a bomb shelter. I've been there. I spent months in Israel where I volunteered on a kibbutz. There was a bomb shelter on every single block and every single building everywhere you go. The Iron Dome, people are always criticizing it, but no one asks. It only has existed for less than 20 years. Like, why does it exist? Why would you need a system? No one's mad about the rockets going into Israel. They only want to divest for the weapons that are coming out of it. But no one questions the 30,000 rockets that fly in there just because they've built up a defense mechanism. So when you ask what Israel will do with their civilians, for one, why is there not more of a question about this tunnel system that cost billions of dollars, but not one bomb shelter? If those were my fucking kids, put them in the tunnel. Why are your people above ground? Why are you operating out of a hospital? Why are you operating out of schools? Why are you operating out of UNRWA? Like, those are calculated moves. So when they talk about human shields, it's just, it's like anything else. It's like Kim Kardashian. It becomes saturated. You stop, you hear something so much, you become desensitized. So the term human shields kind of lost all meaning. But how come no one asks why they did not? If they knew what was going to happen. You go watch the show Fauda, okay? It was filmed in 2014.
I love that show.
It's a great show. They're talking, it all is played out. They talk about, the Hamas, there's all these storylines where they're like, we're going to do something really fucked up to the Zionists. We're going to do something we've never done before. We want to incite them into a war. The world's going to turn against them, blah, blah, blah. Like these things are a lot more intentional than are realized. And if you knew you're going to go into, they planned October 7th, you knew what this retaliation was going to be. Why the fuck did you
Do you think it was a failure of intelligence? Do you think that the Israeli government should have seen that? Right?
There are so many, the mea culpas are insane. There is blood on both sides for what happened on October 7th, I believe. I don't have the proof. When I talk to friends and family in Israel, there's a lot of outrage. I mean, you look at the climate pre-October 7th, there was a lot of talk of a coup forming against Netanyahu. It's not like the Israeli people, everyone in Israel has been thrilled with their government. They're feeling extremely abandoned in a lot of ways, starting from October 7th. Then on top of it, the world telling them, you don't matter. You don't have the right to exist. You deserve to get fucking raped. Everyone, to feel the entire world turn against you and then diminish and discriminate everything about your belief system, who you are. I mean, I can't believe some of the things I'm being told, that I'm the representation of X, Y, and Z. Not only that, a lot of the things they're saying are the exact opposite. It's like, who are the Jewish people? Who are we at the core? What's our story? I mean, some of it you have to laugh. It's like Easter. I'm like, let's all go celebrate Easter, which is about, Jesus's resurrection in where, guys, or like, let's talk about the story of Passover, and not to get back into, because you can do all this historical stuff. It doesn't matter. Both sides have been through immense suffering. And right now, the focus should be on what does a coexistence look like? And it's never going to happen unless the world also can empathize and give respect to both people's right to exist. Period.
Definitely. So, Kari, let's close on this one last point. So, I believe it was yesterday that the news came out that Hamas accepted the quote unquote, accepted the ceasefire, right? So, as somebody who has family in Israel, obviously you have a better ear on the ground. I would say as soon as I saw this, I'm like, man, Hamas is playing 3D chess here, because this puts Netanyahu in an impossible position. Because if it comes out that they accepted the peace deal and he goes into Rafah, the world is gonna if things were bad now, they're about to get really bad, right? And on top of that too, the families of the hostages in Israel now are beside themselves, because they're like, are you kidding me? Right? Because think about it, right? Like, you could want to make sure that, because I think like this conflict has brought Israelis together like very closely, right? But if you have your parent or your kid in a dungeon in Gaza, any day that goes by is
it's actual torture,
right? Yeah. So when you hear that there is even the possibility of even a fake ceasefire,
of course, everyone's hanging on to these hopes. These talks and these delegations have been a fucking nightmare from the beginning, and the way the media plays it out. So here's what happened, and I told you to check it.
Right.
The delegation happened. Hamas refused. There was a deal put on the table. Israel was in agreement. Qatar, Egypt, the U.S. Hamas refused the deal. Israel said, we're going to go into Rafah now. This was on, what day is it today? Today is Tuesday?
Tuesday, yeah.
Yeah, today's Tuesday. So this was on
Monday?
Sunday.
Yeah,
Sunday, the delegation happened, whatever, into the early evenings. Hamas refused that deal. They're both playing 3D chess.
Right.
Israel starts to go into Rafah. Hamas comes out with a statement. I told you to check it. Motaz, that journalist, was the first one to break it. I saw it because, again, my algorithms are tripped up. I'm seeing stuff on both sides.
Right.
So I'm like, holy shit, he posted it. I haven't seen any of the news outlet or the influencers that I follow that usually have the first breaking news out of sort of that lens of the Israeli side. I'm like, this is odd. No one's posted it. Then it all starts to come into play where the media starts posting it. What Hamas did was they refused the deal that the entire delegation put on the table on Sunday. On Monday, Egypt, Qatar, and Hamas created a new deal that Israel hadn't seen. Before Israel had seen it, Hamas puts out a statement, and go look at the timestamp of Motaz. He's the first one to say Hamas accepts and agrees to a ceasefire deal. And you even said to me that deal could save the hostages.
Right.
But that deal. So before even Israel saw it, it was a new deal that wasn't the one that was.
What's in it? Like?
Wait, I want to tell you one of the biggest differences, and everyone's like, it's just a small word. What they changed in that deal was also dead hostages versus alive. How many dead versus alive? That's not accepting a deal.
Break that down for me there for a second, because like obviously
so they changed it. There was going to be 33 hostages. It was something like 3 a week versus 3 a day.
Right.
One of the changes, I don't know all the changes and all the deal points, but I know that one of the changes in their proposed ceasefire deal that they agreed to before even presenting it to Israel, they just put it out there and the media fucking ran with it. Hamas agreed to a deal. Like, these are the same people that are designated terrorist organizations. I know some of you think they're freedom fighters and resistance movement, and fuck you, frankly. But they love your work. You know, the deal that they changed was putting out dead hostages as part of that number versus 11. Look, I don't believe that either side is going to take a deal.
What you're saying. So you're saying that as part, like instead of so they were counting. So let's say if they say we're going to release 3 a day. Let's say, for example, that 3 can contain dead
bodies. But not only that, you have to ask yourself. They have these delegations that are organized in these countries with the respective governments all at a table. Why does no one question that all of a sudden Hamas comes up with, like, Hamas agrees to what deal? Nobody even questioned it. Why would they assume that it was the deal from the day before?
The Egyptians and the Qataris have been working day and night to kind of smooth these things over. And you can understand what their motivations are. They just want to get in bed with the US, right? Why would they all of a sudden kind of like, because that sounds to me like what you're saying is they're working in cahoots with Hamas
and Israel. You're asking answers. I don't know. There's corruption at every level. Why would Qatar simultaneously be the broker of peace when funding Hamas? Like, the answer to that is, how long is a piece of string? You know, I don't have, like, it's all manipulation. So who knows if they even, I don't know what degree they did agree to it or what they signed off on. All I know is, and how much control they have, about as much control over Hamas as the U.S. does over Netanyahu. You know, you are dealing with 2 sides of the same coin, but one is being vilified so much more, and so are its people, like, blindly. But why?
So what are you hearing? What are you hearing in Israel? Like, what are you hearing from your friends and relatives down there?
They are heartbroken. They're completely. It's a combination. Israelis.
But how about do you think, like, if Netanyahu sticks to his ground, like him and some of the members of his coalition government, that a lot of people are saying, because if you look at, like, for example, there was an article that came out, I think it was Haaretz Times of Israel, one of those two, where the minister of settlements, she went on, she was giving this interview and she said that, it makes no sense. Like, any deal for the hostages would be forsaking the aims of the war for about 20 to 33 people, which was even just like the way that she kind of say the number has like 22 to 30. Like,
again, we always cite these few people. It's like, there's shitty people at all sides of this. That was a horrible thing to say. It's like most, I think, Jews and Israeli believe so strongly in how meaningful each one of those hostages are. It's like they represent, like, at its core, everything that we've suffered. It's like one of us killed is one of our children to everyone. The connection between every Jew in the world, not every Jew, the majority that are sharing the view of, a similar viewpoint. We are following those hostages, each one of them, as if it was our own child, like the pain that, so her to say that is just one of the bad voices, and it's unacceptable, And
that's what I was going to ask.
There's always those questions that come up. I don't know how to answer it. Like, as a parent, I would want my government to do everything,
whatever it takes, right?
And as a nation, I would want my country to protect me for going to war. Like, that's why I'm like, why is Israel the ultimate villain when Hamas has played such a huge part? You're seeing a lot of, so for as much as journalists aren't allowed in Hamas, now that they've been weakened, you're seeing a lot more. You're not going to see it because your algorithms won't let you, but there's a lot more voices out of Gaza coming out and truly like standing against Hamas, and voicing, their desire for them to have not be ruled by Hamas, or how they don't agree with what happened October 7th, or you never see the news reporting on Hamas stealing aid, Hamas murdering their own people, all these things that only one side, you're seeing such fragments of a whole story.
But don't you think that also the Israel is held to a much higher standards, given the fact that they are a liberal, one of the, I think the only liberal democracy in the Middle East, right?
They are absolutely. But then I guess my question is, if you're held to a higher standard, I know they are, at a certain point, when the beast and the head of the snake fucks with you that hard, how else are you supposed to deal with them? And again, I'm not saying not without diplomacy and not without civilian casualties, but at a certain point, everyone's like, you can't negotiate with terrorists, but you guys need to, because you're a democratic state. You can't kill innocent civilians, but you have to go to war, but you can't defend yourself. Like, not only is Israel held to a higher standard than Hamas, they are held to a higher standard than almost any country in any given conflict in the world. And all these, slack to this.
So then don't you think that, for example, like those fringe voices in the Israeli government, like, like the small church, the big giver, like those kind of like extreme, like, like that minister of settlements, we're talking about, going into Gaza and kind of like, right. So when you add it to the fact that Israel is held to such a standard, and their voices are so much more amplified, because when Hamas says crazy shit, we're like, they're terrorists anyway, they're gonna say crazy shit.
I know, but we give them so much more permission. Both of them deserve the same weight, to be honest. The extreme Israeli government and Hamas. But that's not what's happening. Like, what we started this conversation about, again, because you could talk about that forever, was the fringe voices and the reaction from the world based on these two governments' actions, and the pointed hate coming at like me. Why am I a target?
Exactly.
I live in what the fuck, like, why am I in danger right now? Why do I have to shut my blinds? Why do I have to take the mezuzah off my door? Why do I have to tell my kids to take their fucking high necklace off? Why do I have to tell my kids right now, don't tell anyone you're fucking Jewish? I used to make a joke my kids are both blue eyes and blonde hair. I married someone not Jewish, by the way.
Okay. I thought it was the Holland part of you, like, well,
drink milk. And I remember making jokes, not even realizing how part of our fabric was. Like, everyone's like, stop talking about the Holocaust, it was so long ago. But 1948, it's like, wait a second,
it's people still alive.
We're the same. We're kind of still having the same trauma. And I used to joke that, like, if it ever came into play, my kids could hide. Like, that was something that, like, I didn't even realize, A, it wasn't funny, but B, it was like, that's just part of our DNA. I had blue-eyed kids, and I was like, yes, my kids could hide.
Yeah, no, that's I remember, like, back home, like, Hutus and Tutsis, the way they were identified was by physical traits. So Tutsis usually had like longer nose, and Hutus had wider ones. So, like, my mom being Tutsi and my dad being Hutu, that's one thing that was said is like, you better put some weight on your chest so they don't recognize that.
I never knew that one parent was
Yeah. My mom is Tutsi, my dad is Hutu. Yeah. So and they will tell you, like, hey, you better drink your milk, don't be skinny, because they're gonna think you're Tutsi. Right. So so I totally get, like,
exactly.
And
then let me ask you something. You came from a genocide. Do you believe what's happening in Gaza right now is a genocide?
See, honestly, that term, again, it's another one of those terms that has been just like everything just take, like, nowadays is like it's people take words and they just completely mismanage their meaning, that you don't know where it stands, right? So if we're talking about, if a genocide is the willing kind of like cleansing of a group of people, because I guess we can look up like kind of like the functional definition.
Yeah.
The difference between I believe like what happened in Rwanda and what's going on in Israel and Gaza right now. I think like one thing that I will say is I don't think it's a genocide, but I think like a lot of it is motivated by anger and a sense of revenge, right? Me and like look, and it's
But that's
human.
the question
Anybody,
is, I get it, but
right,
the question, I
right,
guess, I'm being pointed
right.
because
Like
all these things are in
okay,
the
okay, so yeah,
lexicon and these
right,
accusations. We know that
right,
there's anger,
right.
resentment, revenge on all sides.
Mm,
But like,
mm-hmm.
as I've been wanting to reach out to you, there's
Right.
you and there's other people we both know that grew up in
Mm-hmm.
Rwanda. You know, like
Right.
when, and
I
I
mean,
thought
so
of
look,
you to
so
it.
if I use like, I'm not, I don't know the exact kind of like scholarly definition, but if I look at, for example, the comparisons, right? In the one Rwanda, for example, the way it started with the kind of like the Hutu, dehumanizing Tutsis in things like language explanation, right? They're cockroaches, they're this, they're that, right? Again, like you were saying, there are fringe voices on every side. For example, there are certain people in government in Israel that have said, they always throw around the whole Amalek thing. Like I haven't really looked into it as to how, but I guess from what I gathered is, it's part of the Hebrew Bible where I guess like it was about like the complete annihilation of your enemies or something like that. And that's
It's
kind of like
also
language,
intention, right? Intention,
right? Yeah,
which I also laugh when
right.
people are like, "Well, where's the intent?" It's like Hamas says it everywhere.
Right.
We
That's
are
true.
going to
That's
do
true.
it again and again. We want to
Mm-hmm.
kill you. Our intention is to
Mm-hmm.
wipe you out. They don't
Mm-hmm.
hide it. So I know the
Right.
Israeli
So,
government. There's been voices that say it too, but
right. But let's say also too, for example, too though is there like again there is this and these people have a lot of power. They might be a small fringe minority of people, but
I
they have a
understand
kind
that
of
too.
a very strong voice where they would say things like, "Hey, let's send them in the Sinai Desert," and you have
Yeah,
guys like Smotrich saying crazy stuff like that. So that is genocidal language within itself. Now, do
yeah.
I believe like the majority of Israelis stand behind? Kind of taking every Palestinian to the desert? No, I don't think so. Right? I don't think so. But also, too, at the same time, there were Hutus like my dad who literally is responsible for saving dozens of my mother's side of the family, kind of thing. Right? So
Yeah.
I think too, like genocide as we knew it, right? Like the way, like what the Nazis did, where you could do something like I guess
Let's just say that for a minute. People are
Mhm.
like, stop talking about the Holocaust. Six
Right?
million. I think
It's
that
insane.
number's lost all meaning too. 6 fucking million.
It's insane.
Too
Yeah.
many casualties have happened, but we're talking about a 7-month period where the numbers that are
Mm.
cited, and this isn't to diminish it, it's just because we're speaking about numbers and facts, where let's call it 35,000. They say civilians have been killed, Palestinians,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Of that 35,000, a big portion of them, I don't know the exact numbers, so I'm not going to say them, but let's say 12,000, however many, I've seen different numbers come around, are Hamas combatants, and then that leaves however many innocent civilians. And of
Mm.
course, there's how many people have been displaced, how many people are not getting aid, how many people have been injured. It's too many no matter what. But
Mm.
when you talk about these numbers and terms in the context of the language that's being used around them, it gets
Mm.
dangerous because
Definitely,
when
yeah.
you
No,
talk
because
about the
words
extermination
are
of
very
6 million
important.
people, like we're only
Yeah.
15 million people in the entire world that
No,
are
I mean,
Jewish.
look. Like words definitely matter. Like what? Like I always kind of use that analogy when talking about the Rwandan genocide. Is like I always use the analogy of the Holocaust just to show the efficiency of the Hutus. So in Rwanda, there
Yeah,
was the Hutus killed 1 million people over the course of
it's
3 months,
insane.
right? And these guys, like like the Nazis had they had planes, concentration camps, trains, all that type of stuff.
They
They were
were,
very efficient,
again, when it
right? Like
comes to
these
Jews,
guys,
people are planning it. That's my
yeah,
point. They
right.
don't,
So
they don't,
no, but
it's
but it goes
planned.
to show, like it goes to show
Yeah.
what I was saying is like although it was a sixth of
I can't
the
believe there's a
Jews that died in the
million.
Holocaust, Rwanda was still it would classify as a genocide too. So I'm not sure if
It was
the
absolutely a
number of
genocide.
victims,
Rwandan
yeah,
genocide. It's not
yeah,
about the number. It's as you said.
right.
They killed
Mm.
1 million people in 6 months, like with intention
Right.
and
Three
brutally. I
months.
mean,
3 months. Yeah. So that's
oh,
ten
3 months.
thousand.
That's like fucking
It's that
crazy.
is one could say that is German level of efficiency. Maybe we
It
should
is
start looking at
absolutely
that
German
level.
precision. See,
Yeah.
like we can talk genocide
Right.
because
Yeah.
we can
Yeah.
riff on it.
Mhm.
It's not, none of it's funny. But
Yeah, but that's kind of how you deal with the pain at the end of the day, right? All you can do is laugh, because if you don't laugh, you're gonna cry. So what
you're
is
gonna cry. I've
right?
cried
So
more in the past 7 months, and I'm a crier. You know, like I
yeah,
will cry at a cheesy commercial. I will cry at a song. I will cry when I see an old couple walking. I'm a crier.
yeah.
I have never cried. And you know, I lost a parent at 14. I watched my dad die of cancer.
Wow.
That was my early trauma, you
Introduction,
know?
yeah.
That was my introduction to grief. I had it young and it
Mm,
gave me so much empathy.
mm.
I've never cried and experienced grief like this
Yeah. I mean, it's,
ever.
it's insane. You know, these are people you know. I'm gonna say,
Yeah,
like, I don't know if I should ask this. Like, is there like, do you have like personal, like people that you knew
oh
that
yeah.
died on October? So like you knew
Oh no,
like
I didn't know anyone personally that died.
mm, mm.
But it was like I remember what's
But
funny.
everybody's like connected to that 6 degrees of
There's a
separation.
connective
If you,
tissue,
yeah,
and
right.
it's you feel it a different way when you're that. You know, I never understood how small we were. I didn't
Mm,
think it was weird that if I went to another country and I met someone Jewish and they'd be like, "Oh my God, you're Jewish, you're Jewish." I none of these things registered to me. I also didn't realize that every single one of our holidays was about people trying to kill us. I was like,
Jesus
I said to
Christ.
my cousin this year at Passover, I was like, you know, because going through the Jewish holidays this year, it was like we had, you know, what's it called? Hanukkah, and then Passover, and some of the Jewish holidays in between, talking about it post October 7th or celebrating these holidays. I called my cousin. I'm like, like, we've celebrated this. I'm like, did you realize that every single one of our holidays are about people trying to kill us? I'm like, because I'm a terrible student. I just didn't fucking
Right.
pay attention in Hebrew school. I'm like, Jesus, they've been trying to tell us. But for me, it was like, oh my God, Hanukkah, there's latkes and candles. And, you
Right.
know, Passover I knew, and it was the Exodus. But like,
Mm.
I just didn't Purim, you know, like
Right.
every single one of our
I mean,
holidays.
Survivor is a good thing to be able to celebrate, right? Like between the
Yeah.
Romans and the
But we're kind
Babylonians and
of
the
done. Like
Turks
there was a
and the
comic that did a whole bit like, don't you guys get it? Like at the end of this, I forget his name, but he talks about how like it's gonna be one of our holidays. There's gonna be like a Sinwar shaped ear cookie, you know, like that's what's
that is
gonna happen.
hilarious. A
You
Sinwar
know?
shaped ear cookie. Oh
And we'll be
man.
telling our kids, like, you know, don't worry,
Jesus.
it's never gonna happen again.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. Well, Karen, on that
Anyway,
note, you know, I thank you so much for doing
thank
this. I can't,
you.
you know, I
Thank
can,
you for being receptive to my
um, uh,
impressive
absolutely, absolutely.
DM
You know,
approach to your
you know what,
handle.
and you know, I'm glad it comes because like somehow I was just coming in from work and I had like, you know, I was a pretty like weird day on the market today, so I was like, and so then I kind of saw like the way I was like, wait, you know what? Kind of actually kind of makes sense. That's kind of a dick thing. I just kind of like you know, like I just didn't think about it. I was like, okay, you know, but I didn't realize that.
What
Yeah,
did I
because
say to you? I'm like, okay, fine. Would you be
yeah,
cool if
yeah,
my
yeah.
handle had
No,
the
because it
sacred
hit me. I'm
K
like,
in it?
yeah, because I look at your stories all the time, right? Like
Yeah,
I said,
yeah.
you know, I'm one of those people. Like, I've done like a few pieces on this conflict and stuff like that. So I like to see where like I try to take in everything. The lexicon
Have
stuff.
you noticed a difference in what I share versus what you're seeing in your feed?
No, for sure, right? Like, so here's the thing. Like you know, like we said at the beginning, is you know. There is very little middle ground here, like, right, you know what I mean? So it's like some people
Yeah.
are, you know, two people could be looking at the same exact thing and have two complete different views, right? So like when, you know, like on my you know, my show, what I try to do, I'm like, okay, because remember, like we talked about at the beginning, like I try to put myself in everybody's shoes, try to kind of remove but again, it's also easy for me to say that I can emotionally remove myself from it,
Yeah.
because for you that's a wound that is right there, that it's open. So, you know, if you see a post, like, you know, you see something like that, you know, me having that, you know, the Ayatollah in my name, whatever, you know, there is a natural feeling.
It's a visceral
that,
feeling.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a visceral feeling because it evokes something, right? So for me, like, you know, it's
Also,
easy for
from
me
a
to be
work
like,
standpoint, I'm trying to figure out who could I still talk to? Who are my friends?
right,
You know,
right.
who could
No,
I
it's
trust?
true.
So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anymore.
You know
I
what?
mean,
Though,
I
but
do.
I think it's also important that, like, you know, you know, while looking for friends to talk to about these things, it's important not to just have like confirmation bias and just having people that all think like you, and it's just kind of like this lack of a better
Yeah.
term, like it's a little circle jerk situation. Well, and that's why I was like, okay, you know what? Everybody that I talked to about this conflict is, you know, it's either people I know or like, you know, I'm a very centrist person, so I kind of tend to go into, but I never actually really, you know, there was another like right after it happened, I did a big piece on it with another friend of mine who's Jewish, very well educated gentleman who kind of really knows his stuff. Maybe I can send you like the episode where kind of but this was just like right at the beginning, like I think it was like October 8th or 9th. Wow. Right? So because right when things were fresh, but I hadn't gotten to kind of like really kind of like delve into it with somebody else, who's looking at it from a Jewish lens, after the conflict had gone deeper and deeper kind of thing. Also too, because a lot of the time too, like you don't understand how refreshing this is. Most of the time is people get so sensitive that sometimes they're like, okay, I don't know how to be able to bring this. So, it was just immediately when they feel like, oh, you're not on my side 100%.
No, I'm, you know what I mean?
Like things explode kind of thing, right?
I'm Jewish, but I'm really truly on the side in a voice, not the Jewish Voices for Peace, that organization. But I am a Jewish voice for peace.
Maybe I'll cut that and edit it like, ooh, Kari Holland, Jewish.
I'll do a diss track right back at you.
Immediately.
Kendrick and Drake real fast.
It's an immediate diss track right away.
I get to be Kendrick. You can.
You team Kendrick?
No, I don't know. Of course, I'm team nobody. I'm team. I'm a Gen Xer. I got to experience the Biggie Tupac. I'm just sort of like, oh, your shoes small. Like this. I don't know. I don't care. I really don't care. I love Drake. I love Kendrick. That's whatever. Amazing. That's a whole other conflict. It's too scary.
Kari, you're an absolute gem. Please let people know where they can find you. What some of the work that you got coming out that they can look out for.
And anyone that wants to have a conversation, I'm open. Look,
awesome.
So anyone that wants to talk about it, that's curious, that is uncomfortable and wants to talk in private, I promise to respect that too. I can't speak on behalf of everyone, but I'm definitely, if you want to talk to me about it as someone who is Jewish, experiences in Toronto, hit me up.
You mentioned that you're working on a documentary about this. Are you okay to talk about it?
Not right now, but there's
okay.
Project,
awesome.
There's one project I guess I should probably talk to her first. There's a few projects that are coming out of this too, that I'm working on. It's like that. Take your broken heart and turn it into art. One that I'm collaborating on with a Muslim writer, that we're working together on it. It's a comedy, obviously.
Oh yeah.
But I think the more conversations and the more finding common ground and the building of bridges, and not forgetting, like, the divisiveness is so scary to me, because like what I said to you within our industry, going back to that for a minute, I used to feel such a kinship, and now I feel like a real outlier. I feel uncomfortable in a place that I feel like I've helped really build, and it's heartbreaking for me. And it's created a bit of like a shell that I never had before, You know what? I think
maybe we'll start our own echo chamber of you know what I mean, the voices of reasons in the middle, and those
divestment. Like, can we just fucking make shit and use our artist voices for peace? That would be really cool.
Kari, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. You're amazing, and let's keep the conversation alive. I would love to do this again, sometime soon, when I'm sure there's going to be a lot of developments coming up, and I will need another voice of reason to kind of parse through things. So if you're open, I'll definitely love to have you.
I'm always open. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye, Kari.